Hello. This thing apparently is working. So I have the distinct advantage, I think, of being the only person here without a PMP. So either you're going to love me or you're going to hate me, but I'll do my best to make sure it's the better one. So today we're going to talk about 50 Shades of Agile Transformations. And the reason this topic is so near and dear to my heart is that there are many, many people in some shade of gray between a perfect Agile implementation and what we've been doing for the last 400 years in software development. I build Agile businesses, and what that means is me and my company go into organizations that have been traditionally using waterfall or phased program planning approaches like NASA used to use for building space shuttles, and help them deliver a little bit more quickly, smaller pieces, but more quickly, and make sure they're on the right track. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So like Lisa said, I'm a Scrum.org trainer. I'm with Responsive Advisors, but licensed through Scrum.org. Anyone here a CSM through Scrum Alliance? Handful of you? Any of you have a PSM from Scrum.org? One? Couple? All right, so they're the scrappy underdog, but ultimately the same author of Scrum invented both organizations. At one point, there were some creative differences, and, well, he left and started Scrum.org. I'll leave you to the internet on that one. But I love solving big problems, and what I mean by big problems are those problems that are at the forefront of where the Agile development community just doesn't have answers, like how to solve the finance problem, how to solve the vendor management problem. All these things, as mind-bending as they are, I like to solve these problems. So today we're going to talk about some of those problems. How do you hybridize successfully your Agile implementation? So I own Responsive Advisors. High level about that, I started the company a few years ago with the mission of building a company that focuses strictly on Agile management consulting while practicing what we preach. So all that crazy stuff about empowerment, yeah, we do that. All that crazy stuff about not a lot of policies when you don't need it, we do that too. And I'm going to keep doing it until I can't do it anymore. National public speaking, for whatever reason, I love being on stage. I do know why. I thought I was going to be a rock star when I was a kid, so I didn't really get good grades. I skipped class a lot. It's pretty sad. I had to get my transcript once, and it said I was missing like 25 English classes in a semester, so they made me take it again. But, you know, I had this rock star idea in my head, and then I went off to try to do it, and it didn't really work out that well. So eventually I went back to school and decided to follow my passion of being on stage, but in this capacity, I did consulting, so you kind of get to do the same thing without a rock band. All right, a little bit about my company. Holistically, we provide Agile transformation services. We teach public courses in LA, Chicago, and New York, but that's not really what we love to do. We love to change organizations. Yes, we teach classes, but it's a whole lot more than that. You'll see the logo at the bottom if you want to find a little bit more about us and how we're different. I'd love for you to, but without further ado, why are we here today? We're going to talk about if we should use an Agile approach or a waterfall approach or maybe a hybrid. Which one do we use? This is a tough question. So I've heard some people say today that we should always use a hybrid. Maybe. We're going to learn the pros and cons of a few different Agile hybrids. I'm going to show you the flavors that I've seen, or the shades of gray, over the next hour. We're going to learn a little bit about successful hybrids, when those do exist. And we're going to learn also about the ones that I've seen that didn't work out so well. So we'll get there. And then I promised Lisa at the end of this that I was going to teach you how to build your own Kanban board so that you could apply some of these concepts right away at home on a waterfall project. You don't even have to start by ripping everything down and using Scrum. We can start a little bit more carefully than that. Let's talk about process fundamentals. I feel like if you really want to know how to hybridize Scrum or some Agile framework with waterfall, you can do it. You just got to understand how the tools work, when to apply them together, when to separate them, and the pros and cons of each. Has anyone seen this before? We call it the Stacie Diagram. Some problems are simple problems. Simple meaning their technological uncertainty is pretty low, if not zero, and their requirements uncertainty is also zero. Let me give you an example. Chocolate chip cookies. I think we all know how to make those, right? This is a simple problem. We've been making them a long time, and I actually Googled it. I think they started making chocolate chip cookies in the 30s. It's a weird history. They're not even that old. Like 80 years ago, we invented chocolate chip cookies. But either way, it's a pretty simple problem. If you look on the back of a chocolate chip cookie package, it usually spells out exactly what you have to do. Set the oven to like 350 degrees, mix the ingredients a certain way, put so much vanilla in, blah, blah, blah. You get to cookies that taste reasonably good at the end, though I still burn them. So it should be a simple problem with qualified people. A complicated problem is something where you get a little bit further from uncertainty, or a little bit further into uncertainty with technology and requirements. Building automobiles, mass producing them anyway, could be thought of as a complicated problem. There are some variations, there are some variabilities. Every time you screw in a bolt, you might screw it up. There could be some things that go wrong, as Elon Musk is finding out now. But for the most part, this is a repeatable process. Once you've built the first one, you just got to stamp out 100,000 more similar objects, basically from this, the only variation maybe being paint color and leather trim. Complex problems, now that's when we get onto the other side, when there are more things uncertain than certain, in terms of requirements, in terms of technology. Typically, software development falls in that space. So does any real new product development where you're unsure if your customers are going to like it. Anyone have a fully automated car yet? Yeah, we're still working on that one. They're trying things out. They're finding out that, oh, hey, if we don't do this right, these things seem to run people over. We're working those kinks out, and hopefully eventually we're going to all have automated Ubers and not have to own our cars anymore. Is that okay here in Grand Rapids? Would you like to give up your cars? In bigger cities, they want to give up their cars, so it might be a regional thing. So chaos, let me talk about that. Chaotic is when we don't know anything. Everything changes all the time, and there's no certainty anywhere, really. Give you an example. If you work at the hospital's emergency room, you have no certainty about what's going to happen that day or what tools you're going to need. You don't know what the requirements are because you haven't had that bus full of kids come in with the flu quite yet. If you run into a situation where you're overloaded, you might have to call people that are waiting, like with a pager or a cell phone because they're on call. And they have a completely different way of working. There's not a lot of big upfront planning you're going to be able to do when every day is just completely a surprise. Firefighting also falls in this category. But what about support issues for, like, say, a software product? Are you getting bugs coming in all the time, completely random, you never know where they're coming from? Production support issue, you got to jump to this thing or jump to that? Might also fall in the chaos space. All right, so just planting that seed. There are different ways of working depending on which of these environments you find yourself in. Let's talk about a defined process. They're repeatable. I do the same thing over and over. Cookie production is a defined process. Linear. These are linear, step by step. You have to follow the steps in order. It doesn't make sense to make cookies by starting with the bake process. You have to start by gathering ingredients and then mixing them, and in that order. Predictable steps. There are no surprises. Last one here, predictable completion rates. So if it takes me 10 minutes to make a batch of cookies, I can be reasonably certain it'll take me about 10 minutes to make the second one. And if I have to make 100 of them, I can give you an end date. It's pretty simple. We get the same thing every time. We don't need sprint reviews if you're making chocolate chip cookies because, well, we all know what they taste like. And if you let me taste just one, I'm pretty sure the other million are going to taste the same. Let's talk about some examples. We already talked about cookie making. This is basically my favorite example. Mass producing a vehicle, we touched on that. Building a home. Yes, building a home is a defined process, but this is mostly because of the laws of physics. Anyone here ever try to build a home or have somebody build a home for them? Or maybe buy one that you have to remodel? Yeah, you go in there and it's all done and you're like, oh, I know I didn't nail this down in the requirements up front, but I really wish I had that window on the southern exposure of the house. It's too late now. It's been 2 years, they've already poured the foundation and built the entire house. There's no changing it once you've done it unless you want to pay 50 grand in change fees. So building a home, we've got to get right the first time because it's so difficult to change it. Why we use waterfall. Constructing a bridge, pouring concrete, again, we're not going to change that. If we could incrementally deliver a bridge, you might build one lane at a time. Just prove somebody will actually use your bridge, and then incrementally enhance it by adding another lane. The laws of physics prevent this. So, for now, we will be constructing bridges and building homes using waterfall. Undefined process, not repeatable. They are also nonlinear, unpredictable steps, and unpredictable completion times. Sound familiar? So if we get something new every time we run through this process and we have all these things going on, it's an undefined process and you really got to work it a different sort of way. Here's some examples. Painting a masterpiece. Don't use a Gantt chart for that. It's not going to work. Writing software. This is one of the reasons why we take a different approach and why waterfall has some friction with it. It's a creative effort. Anyone here ever write code before? Ooh, a lot of you. So you might know that if I were to ask you to write a divider algorithm today, and in 10 years after you've been coding for a while, ask you to write the same algorithm in the same language, how many of you are going to write it the exact same way you wrote it the first time? I'm guessing 0 of you. I'm a recovering developer myself, and I would always write it differently the second time. Why? Because I got better. I read the Gang of Four Patterns book and I started applying them. Or maybe there's a new framework and I don't have to write so much boilerplate stuff. It's like writing poetry. You can always write it more elegantly. So you don't have to know anything about code to know that it's more like writing poetry than it is like building a bridge. Creating music. And we can follow the same exact waterfall process all the way through to build a song, but I can't promise you anyone's going to like to listen to it. Writing a book, same process. Though I do hear publishers force you into waterfall when you're actually making the book. Like you have to write so many pages per week. You have to hit these sort of milestones because they've got a date. It's actually kind of bizarre. So there are some incompatible formats, and we got to watch out for this. If you're using the wrong framework at the wrong time, expect to get weird results. We got to know, is this a defined or a linear process? If it's not, would we categorize it as an undefined or nonlinear process? Where does this fall within the Stacie diagram? Is it simple? Is it complicated? Is it complex? Or is this just complete chaos? We got to use the right process for the work. Fair? Okay. So here's a little icebreaker. We got all these wonderful tables. I'm going to give you 1 minute. Now I'm going to have to watch you manually because I can't use my laptop today. Whatever, Mac doesn't like to play nice with the video monitors here. I'm going to time you with 1 minute. I need you to answer this question. What is Agile? What does this mean? Because if we don't understand what Agile means, we can't Agile-Hybrid anything. Pick one of these options. A, B, C, D, E, or F, other. Each table will come up with an answer, and I'll do a quick poll to see what the answer shook out to be, okay? On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. All right, that was 1 minute. Let's see what the answers end up being. All right, raise your hand if your table said it was a philosophy or a mindset. Okay. Raise your hand if it's a collection of software development practices. Okay. What about being nimble or flexible? Some of you are thinking that. You can only raise your hand once, by the way. A way to deliver projects faster. You got one. Own it. Agile equals Scrum. They are the same thing. Other? Some of you are saying other. Other, what are we thinking? All of the above. Okay. Well, so it can be confusing. How are we going to make an Agile-Hybrid if we don't know what the first part of that hyphenated sentence means, or the hyphenated word? So yeah, let's look at this for a second. I look at Agile as being what that says. I Googled it, and I copied and pasted it into the screen here, and the first thing it says is, what is that? Able to move quickly and easily. Now stop there for a second. To be an Agile organization, to be an Agile business, I think it means that. And if you want to go back to the Agile Manifesto, I'm not going to put that up on the screen. You can go Google that on your own. But if you take the word Agile and swap it for nimble or swap it for flexible and then read the whole thing, it still makes sense. So that's really what they're saying in the first place. We want to build software in an Agile way. And I'll throw this out there now that we're talking about history. Scrum did not come from software. It came from hardware development. Does anyone know what paper it came from? Some homework for you. The New Product Development Game. It was a research paper done in the 80s about some hardware companies in Japan and the United States. 80% of the ideas in Scrum came directly from that paper. So don't think of it just as a software thing. I've had many companies using Scrum that weren't building software. It can be a little frustrating because it takes me longer to explain the concepts, but it did come from hardware. So anyway, Agile, think of it that way. And then now these Agile hybrids might make a little more sense, at least to me, and you have to listen to me for the next 25 minutes, so bear with me here. Assumptions. Waterfall and Scrum were basically designed to solve the exact same problems. Don't think of it like, oh, well, Agile is incomplete because it doesn't have all these pieces. They do have the same pieces. They have a delivery of value mechanism. They have a mechanism to create transparency and keep it raised high. They're trying to mitigate financial, technical, and business risk. They are decomposing work into small enough pieces that can be done by human beings. We're assigning roles and responsibilities, and of course, we're managing the iron triangle of project management. We just do it differently. Okay? So I don't have time to really get into all the details or dispel all the Scrum myths out there. If you'd love to talk about it, I'll be off the side here after class. But let's talk about the shades of gray. 100% SDLC, that is a shade of gray. That is on one end of the spectrum, where we're completely using waterfall, we are completely bought into it, and we still use it in 100% fashion. The next step might be just a stand-up. We're doing everything the way we did before, but for 15 minutes every day, or some of you maybe half an hour, we're going to stand up and we're going to talk about how things are going. Sprints are just handoffs. So we might still be using some form of Scrum, using sprints, but effectively we're still handing off from analysis to development to QA. Teams are changing constantly. So with typical projects, we move people around. We start up a new project, we assign resources, the project does its thing, you have a lessons learned, disband the team. The Scrum Master and the Project Manager are represented on the same team. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Scrum, but we're not really releasing anything, or we don't even have anything releasable at the end of a sprint. That's a shade of gray. Dividing and conquering based on job titles. So that is kind of a waterfall thing. If you looked at phase program planning in NASA, they had very highly specialized individuals that would do their work, and then they would hand it off to the next group of specialists that would pick up from there and move on with that work. Globally distributed teams. So I got to experience this firsthand. I just came back from an international trip. Was it 2 days ago? I'm still a little bit dazed and confused from the jet lag, but I was in Australia, then Malaysia, then Japan teaching classes. And being 15 hours away from my team was excruciatingly painful in order for us to have any kind of conversation. Because when I'm waking up, they were getting off of their workday, and then, no. I'm still confused. The 15-hour lag was really painful, though. Your finance group probably still expects waterfall no matter how scrummy you are. They're still saying, what am I going to get, how much is it going to cost, and when's it all going to be done? And not a lot of people haven't answered that question yet. And then there's Agile Nirvana. This is the place that basically no one is at. It is possible to get there, and very, very small organizations are usually pretty close. A company of 6 people working out of a garage doesn't yet need a PMO. They haven't yet established any sort of direct responsibility for functional specializations. And they've got it pretty easy. But as companies get bigger, things change. So we're going to go through those. Let's talk about 100% waterfall. In this shade of gray, we're talking about phase-gated development. All of you are probably familiar with this. Functional areas, specialized resources, handoffs, approvals. It's often associated with long delivery times, though it doesn't have to be. You could do waterfall projects in 30 days or less if you wanted to. Who does that? Anyone here do 30-day waterfall projects and you never have a waterfall project larger than that? None of you. All right, opportunity for improvement there. Make your waterfall projects under 30 days. It's amazing the benefits you'll see. Time to value is typically 6 months. I've heard as much as 5 years. Is that common? Yeah? Okay. And if you guys are the project managers, I'm guessing you're accountable for everything. You are the throat to choke. Is that fair? Okay, that sucks. You have no control over the work, and yet it's your butt on the line. I don't think that's fair at all. So here's how it's supposed to work, and I just picked on software as an example, but this could be really for anything. We could be building a new iPhone. We could be building a new automobile for the first time. You start out with requirements, and we spend some time figuring out what those are, and then we get some sort of sign-off. Yeah, that's exactly what I want. And then we analyze it, and we try to design it and develop it, blah, blah, blah. We build the thing. Then it goes into a testing period. Ideally, we get to an acceptance, where the customer's like, yep, that's what I wanted. I'm happy. That's how it's supposed to work. This is a Gantt chart. I'm sure we're all familiar. Anybody not seen a Gantt chart here? I'm in the right room, right? Yeah. So this is how we're managing that kind of work. And as long as it's a defined, repeatable process, this goes fairly smoothly. If we're going to make 100 million chocolate chip cookies, I expect this chart to work pretty well. But here's a question for you. So I forgot her name. Does anybody remember her name from the movie? Anastasia. Okay, so she wants to know what can change during a large project or delivering a new product in general. I'll give you a minute on that one. Talk with your teams. Come up with the things that can change, and then I'm going to look for some themes. All right, that was 1 minute. So just throw out a couple things. What can change? Everything. How about more specific? Business requirements. That's a popular one. What else? Budget. What else? Resources. What else? Leadership, that's my favorite one, yeah. I worked at a company once, and 1 year we were in an Agile transformation, and they swapped out basically every person and the executive team twice in a year. So that didn't work out so well. Anything else? The weather. Yeah, the weather could change. Let's look. We could go through these all day long. I'm just going to cut to the chase. Can you read those? New product development is pretty complex. So we're relying on a lot of human beings to do work, and human beings are messy. I taught a class in Malaysia, and I get there, and I'm like, where's Robert? And oh, he's on paternity leave. Okay, I mean, I guess that is a surprise, but why did you register for a class if your wife was going into labor? I don't know. Maybe he was literally surprised. I don't know. So mergers or acquisitions. There's another one. Did you guys come up with that? I had a team that had all the biggest plans in the world, and then all of a sudden they were acquiring a bigger competitor. So all the plans that they had were scrapped while they figured out how to merge with that other company. You ever heard of Motorola? Yeah, and Zebra Technologies maybe? Yeah, it was there when they merged. It was very disruptive, needless to say, to their web team. So here's a whole list of things. I'm not going to go through them all, but what's going on here is people are doing the work, and all the things surrounding the people can change. Vision changes, leadership changes, all these things. So we got to understand that when we look at waterfall, because this is how it actually works. Notice that the red lines are going back upstream. That's more like salmon stream, not waterfall. So this is why our dates are getting missed. And this isn't just a software problem. Any type of work that you do that follows the complex space on the Stacie diagram will suffer the same fate using a linear process. All right, you guys seen this before? The cone of uncertainty, another law of project management physics. So the further you are from done, doing something you've never done before, the more your estimates will vary. If you're talking about a 2-year effort and you've never done this thing before, expect your estimates to vary wildly. It's another reason why it's very difficult to predict end dates. The best you can do is try to break things down into small enough pieces where you're close to done on every single one of them. And some people use a work breakdown structure for that, and if you have some form of estimating, that might do it for you. Scrum uses a technique called refinement, backlog refinement. It's a commonly misunderstood practice, but it is in the Scrum guide. If you read under the section about the product backlog itself, that is their form of a work breakdown structure. So look it up. A lot of people miss it. This is a more appropriate way to manage a project that is complex. If you've never done these things before, it's a little bit like forecasting a hurricane. So we're in Michigan. None of you are worrying about hurricanes, right? Anybody have any family that was in Florida recently? I mean, they're worried about it. I've seen this so many times with hurricane forecasting, it's just, I can't unsee it now. They have that same, where's my laser? See this? There's like a cone there. Jira produces this for you for free. Does anyone use Jira? A lot of you. It's a very popular tool. I was just in Australia, 3 blocks away from their headquarters. And get this, one of the owners or the founders of the company just bought the most expensive home ever sold in Australia. They're doing very well. But anyway, this cone of uncertainty, it's a little bit like using a hurricane forecasting tool to forecast the completion of a project. A lot of Agile teams aren't using these, and I can see why people get a little uncomfortable when there's no way to accurately represent, or at least get close to representing, when we're going to be done and what we're going to get for our money. So I'll let you guys look this one up. It's a bit to describe, but there is a mechanism to forecast project completion dates, even in the Agile space. So just a stand-up. Let's say that's all we do. We moved on from being a pure waterfall team. The pros are, it creates an opportunity to surface some issues, helps the project manager gain a little bit of transparency to see where everyone is at, and we can measure our progress a little bit more effectively. However, you guys are in a lot of meetings. I heard someone else ask earlier, who's in too many meetings? And I think that was a lot of you, right? So who wants another 15 or 20 or 30 minutes tacked onto their day every day? It's kind of painful if that's all you're adding into your mix. So it often gets to be longer than 15 minutes, and even worse, not the right people are in the room all the time when we have these daily stand-ups. So let's talk about sprints being handoffs. Some of the pros, shorter time. We can identify some functional issues earlier. A coder tries to build something and it doesn't work. Better to know that in a couple of weeks than a couple of months. We can get started. We can make some minimal changes to how we work. A lot of people are starting with waterfall and they just make these minor tweaks. They don't make a disruptive process change by throwing it all out and then implementing Scrum. Some cons, we're going to still discover a lot of issues downstream. If we're still kicking things off to a QA specialist or QA team at the end, there's a lot we're not going to find out until they get their hands on it. And if the QA people aren't finding anything, you got to wonder why. Value delivery is delayed if all we're doing is working in these sort of iterative chunks, but not really getting to a deliverable state. What I mean by deliverable is I could ship it into production and be okay sleeping at night. If you're not getting to that point every sprint, you're probably working like this. We create some value delivery delays, silos, all kinds of problems with this. Now your team's changing constantly. If we mimic what a traditional PMO might apply, which is we move people around for every project, sometimes there's not enough to go around, so we split people across multiple teams. That's fine. We might be able to balance the people with the work. We've only got so many DBAs or so many hardware engineers. We got these rare skill sets. Okay, we might get some more flexibility by being able to move people around, but guess what? The team dynamics are constantly being disrupted. Has anyone ever been on a team that was just amazing? Like, wow, the best team I've ever been on? In my whole career, I can probably count 2 or 3 of these. Now, I don't know about you, but not everyone I've ever talked to can say they're always on amazing teams. There's something special about it, and no process is going to solve this for you. But you can look to Bruce Tuckman's model of forming, storming, norming, performing, and try to usher yourself through that carefully. But once you get a team that's working together really, really well, don't disrupt it. Keep the humans together. They're gonna do better work if they like each other, and they don't have to fight about just the most basic things. Lessons learned aren't retained. So we do this thing called lessons learned. Sometimes people are calling it like a post-mortem after death. So it's an interesting meeting. I like the idea, but if you don't have the same team that's feeding that lesson back into the next cycle, there's not a lot of improvements going on. Typically, those lessons learned end up in SharePoint, buried in some project file that no one ever looks at again. Unless I'm wrong. Again, I'm not a project manager. Has anybody ever gone back and looked at a lessons learned from a team that they're not on or ever have been on? A few of you have? Okay, who has not? Be honest. It's like 50-50. Okay, so some of you look back. Good. The Scrum Master and the Project Manager on the same team. You can see there's a little tension here, right? Anyone in that situation? You're the PM and there's a Scrum Master. Doesn't that seem a little confusing to you? Yeah, the Scrum Master doesn't know why you're there. You don't know why the Scrum Master's there, but you're trying to make it work because that's what the boss told you to do. Some pros, maybe one is focusing on delivery and the other one is focusing on process. Okay, we don't have to disrupt how we worked before. Okay, and we still have a single throat to choke, and that's all of you, right? You're still ultimately to blame for these projects. But some cons, these role overlaps create a lot of confusion. And the Scrum Masters, add to the mix a product owner, right? And so now the team has a product owner, a Scrum Master, a project manager, and their boss. Now, I've heard of matrix structures, but that's like 4 dimensions. That's that's rough. Manager-led teams. So maybe, that's even better. The manager's right there. They can find out what's going on as it's happening. This can help raise transparency and identify some team issues, but at the same time, this strips empowerment away from the team because they're always feeling like the boss has to make the decisions. Now, if you're a manager working with a Scrum team, better if you don't work with the same one that reports to you, because then at least you don't have that sort of direct reporting weirdness going on. Bad decisions might not be challenged if they report to you. And you might focus more on the methods rather than the results. You might be more focused on, hey, why is your velocity 6 this sprint, as opposed to, hey, look at all the awesome stuff you finished in 2 weeks. Another one, Scrum with no releasable increment. The definition of a sprint is the time period in which we get to a releasable increment. If you're not delivering a releasable increment, you're clearly not doing something right. Forget everything else in Scrum. That's like the most important thing. So if we're not getting to a releasable increment, you might still be mitigating some technical risk and building some internal knowledge, but you're not mitigating any business risk. You're not proving that what you're doing is on the right track. Your customers might look at it and go, I think it's usable, but until they get their hands on it, you might get a different answer. And of course, there's no value in unreleased software. How much do you value a bunch of broken eggs that are all mixed in like a bowl? It's totally worthless until you've converted them into a brownie or a cookie. I would say cookie dough, but a lot of people are like, but I like cookie dough. Forget cookie dough. Just think about the raw eggs. I'm not eating that. I know some people do. It's like a healthy thing, but I don't think so. Divide and conquer based on title. So I'm the senior architect. That means I have to put all the Visio diagrams together. I'm the team lead. That means I need to make all the decisions and tell everyone else what to work on. If you're still working this way, you're missing a huge opportunity to leverage the skills and the talents of the people that are the closest doing the work. So one of my favorite companies that really gets a lot of these ideas right is Toyota. Has anyone ever read anything about them, like the Toyota production system? Yeah, the way they grow their people and the way they grow their managers and the cultural framework that they built. After about, 40 years, they influenced the paper that ultimately influenced Scrum. So you see the history of Scrum all the way back through Toyota and even coming back through some management consultants that came and helped them in the 1950s, back here from the United States. So over, 80 years, it went around the world through multiple industries before it came back into software. So again, if you take away anything, it's that Scrum isn't just for software. It came from hardware development. Now, amplifying hero behavior. Do we know what hero behavior is? Like, I'm the one person that knows everything about this, and I'm going to protect this like a little fiefdom, and I'm not going to share this knowledge with anyone, and when things go bad, I'm going to save the day. You guys ever seen one of those on a team before? Yeah, it destroys the fabric of the team itself. So this dividing and conquer thing has lots and lots of problems. Better if we stand united, work together, hold ourselves accountable as a unit, and work out how we do it at the team level. Globally distributed teams. Now, this is fine. People do it. It's not really the distribution that's the problem. The real problem is the time zones. So when I was teaching in Malaysia, I always ask every class, list out what are your biggest problems here getting work done? And pretty much every class that I taught out there, they told me time zones were a challenge. Because from them to San Diego, which is where their corporate office was, it's like, I want to say 17 hours. It's really, really strange. And they're in the future, too. So if you want to bet on any sports teams, call them up and they'll tell you who won the game so that you can bet on them appropriately here. One of my teammates kept telling me to do that. Tell me if the Brewers won. So he's from Milwaukee. Globally distributed teams, this is challenging for a lot of reasons. If you can't see somebody face-to-face, it can be very hard to trust what they're telling you over the phone or through a Slack message or on email. And the more separated you become as human beings, the more you start to see them strangely as an enemy. Has anyone ever experienced that? And then you just fly over there and meet them face-to-face, and it's like, oh, wow, Sally's actually a really amazing person. But wow, is she mean in emails? So there's all kinds of human-related challenges that come up when you are distributing your teams globally. So this is yet one more shade of gray. In traditional project management, when you have siloed handoffs, and it comes time to hand off that thing over to, pick your favorite state or country, that the communication barriers seem minimal because it's just a handoff. When you're trying to build stuff in small cycles, like using a sprint, and you're trying to get to a deliverable state in under 2 weeks, it's very difficult to do that and have communication delays. So again, shade of gray. Now here is the Agile Nirvana. If you can get here, you're amazing. But not everyone's quite there yet. And I'm sure there's 100 other shades of gray. I just don't have enough time to cover them all. But small self-organizing teams, reliably delivering something in very small batches. This is going to allow you to pivot more quickly. If you're on the wrong track, you're going to find out immediately. If you're on the right track, you can amplify that success. Team empowerment leads to valuable new innovations. It's going to lead to more motivation, more creativity. Lots of benefits there. I don't think I need to sell you on that one. I've been hearing the same theme through every talk today. But distributed decision-making equals faster decision-making. Sometimes a group of engineers getting together to solve a problem will solve it faster than any team lead will. There's just more brains trying to solve that problem. Make that work for you. Robust teams. So you want teams that are nimble, that can respond to changing conditions. If you don't have this, they're going to be fragile, and any new change is going to disrupt them in a meaningful way. And requirements are going to change. There's nothing we can do to prevent that, but we can adapt to it. We can set ourselves up to be change responsive. And that's really the name of the game here. We want to get to market quickly. I heard someone today, in I think one of the earlier talks, talk about the number of companies in the Fortune 500 that's changing, and a lot of companies are getting disrupted. The latest being what? Sears? They just filed for bankruptcy. This is happening at a faster and faster pace. You've got these unicorns coming out of nowhere, and in 5 years have $2 billion valuations, and then you have 130-year-old companies biting the dust. This will keep happening. You can be agile, or you cannot. That's up to you, really. But I've talked a lot about agile hybrid stuff in theory. I want to show you how to do it in practice. Who's watching my time? At 15 minutes, I'm hoping to be here. Are we good? Okay, so I'll continue with this. Kanban, anyone ever used it? Okay, so I'm going to talk about it, and I want to see if anything is new here. So read this book. This is where the idea of Kanban really came from. David Anderson wrote the book. In a lot of ways, it's adapted from some Toyota concepts. David Anderson might disagree, but that's all right. The first principle of the 5 is visualize your work. See it. Now, a lot of you develop Kanban boards as a way to solve this problem, but visualize your work is the number 1 thing. Number 2, limit your work in progress. It's very difficult to know how much work you can do until you have some control over how much work you're trying to do. Has anyone ever tried to work on like 3 or 4 projects at the same time? Yeah, isn't that really painful? Your focus is all over the place. And there's an experiment that I do with my classes where I show them a mathematical proof, for the most part, that when you add more and more projects, you're accumulating more and more knowledge waste in the form of multitasking. Multitasking is very expensive. And it's a fun little experiment. It's difficult to prove in very, very large projects, but you feel it. You feel it every time you try to read 4 books at the same time. So we're going to limit our work in progress, according to Kanban. We're also going to measure and manage flow. Flow being the flow of value. We're trying to get things from idea to cash as quickly as we can and remove any reason to slow that down. Make process policies explicit. So if you have certain exit criteria or certain documentation that must be done or certain ways to handle priority or certain ways to handle emergency, let's make that very explicit so the entire team understands what it is, so the business understands what it is, and so management understands what it is. And continuously improve. So constantly through these cycles using Kanban, we're there to find ways to improve. It's a constant thing. Now, most people just do bullet point number 1. Can anyone in that case where all they're doing is visualizing and not doing the other 4? No one. Great. You're all using Kanban correctly. So this is how you do it. Take the way you work today and visualize all the steps. We call this value stream mapping. Map all the things you have to do to get something from an idea to money. Are you doing this today with Kanban? Or are you just doing to-do, doing done? There's more to it than that. This can be different for every type of company. Like if you were an auto manufacturer, this is a different process. If you're a software or a cookie company, you're going to have different steps. But notice here with my little laser, if that works, I have a sign-off component. So everything has to go to QA, and then we go to sign-off, and then we go to acceptance. Do you guys have any kind of sign-off periods in your value chains? Some of you do, maybe? So those can be very expensive. If you put something on someone's desk and it's like a week before they sign the paperwork so you can release it, that's 5 business days that you do not have value in production. So Kanban is going to argue that you should be looking for those things. Look for anything that you don't need to do or anything that you do that just takes too long and try to shrink it. Try to improve that sign-off, and you're going to buy yourself 5 days for everything you try to release. Now, if you take those exact steps and you just create a board out of it, this is a Kanban board, completely different for every type of process that you're mapping. If you were doing a waterfall-style project with anything, you can use this. Right out of the box, change nothing. Kanban, people would argue, start by changing nothing. Just visualize your work, limit WIP, manage and measure flow, continuously improve, and make process policies explicit. If you do nothing else but those 5 things, you can take a waterfall project and start getting benefits. As you start shrinking the time it takes to get things done, you're going to invent better and better ways to do it. So Kanban is another way of sort of answering the same questions about how do we do work, how do we control the process, how do we improve that process. Anyone here new to Kanban? Just a few of you? Not that many? Is Kanban really that popular here in Michigan? I don't find most people have used it very often. Well, that's great. So using Kanban, let's go to this. Visualizing the work, but don't just do this. This is just the first step, okay? Limit your work in progress. We'll cover that, but people only have so much capacity. If you were going to be watering your flowers out in the garden, you've got a garden hose. If you want more water to flow through that green hose, cracking the whip ain't going to help. You need a bigger hose. But there's no way to visualize that with humans. When you look at a team and you're like, are they busy? Are they working hard enough? I can't tell. Let's jam more work onto their plate and find out. and then everything grinds to a halt. But you can't really see why, because they're not a garden hose. There's no visualization to what their capacity is or what their throughput is. You feel it when things aren't going very fast, but there's no way to see it. This is creating a mechanism to effectively visualize the throughput of a team. Measuring and managing the flow. So just seeing it isn't really useful. You want to take some metrics. You want to find ways to improve it. Look for waste. Look for delays. Look for the things that aren't value-added steps, but you're doing them anyway. And they're all over the place. Making process policies explicit is really about increasing transparency. If you're doing things a certain way, we should all know about it. If there's certain criteria you need to release something, we should all know about it and be agreeing on what that is before we try to release. Continuously improve. There's no shortage of people throwing this set of terms around, but this is a very big part of Kanban as well. Continuously improving how we're working. So that's the Kanban board ideas. One place I've used this successfully is a PMO. They had all these projects in flight, and they had them all managed in a spreadsheet, and I just encouraged them to visualize it. A little bit differently, yeah, you can see it in an Excel file, but you don't really see the magnitude until, let's see, you go back. Until you look at it like this. And when you start to see there's 5 or 6 or 7 different things that are stuck in your sign-off phase, you know there's a problem. You can see that there's a bottleneck. Anyone ever read the goal? Okay, so they use a similar technique in there. You're looking for bottlenecks and you're trying to alleviate bottlenecks so that that flow is restored. All right, Agile hybrids outside of IT. Promise I would get to this one. So in my experience, I've implemented some hybrid Agile techniques with groups that weren't building software. They weren't building anything like it. They weren't even developing new products at all. I had a human resources team that was struggling to manage the flow of recruits through their recruiting process. So somebody applies for a job. That's step one. And somebody's got to call them and say, hey, we got your application. We think you'd be a great fit here. Want to come in for a first interview? And so then they would do that, and they would come in. And they go through this step-by-step process, and it's really different for everyone. But they were losing track of candidates as they were going through, and then forgetting to give them second interviews, and then the person would just get annoyed, and then they'd go take another job. If you're trying to find talent, you don't want your recruiting process to be the problem. So we set up a Kanban board. We set up a cross-functional team of HR specialists and generalists that work together to manage this, and just cherry-pick pieces of Agile frameworks to put together some sort of a process so that they didn't lose people in the pipeline. Another one, I had a group that was, technically it was IT, but they were writing documents. They were writing risk documents so that they could be audited. All this kind of paperwork. And so we set up a Scrum team for them, and what they did was basically deliver policies in documents iteratively. Every couple of weeks, they showed them to the CTO and the CIO and the Chief Security Officer, and they would review them and go, yeah, I like what you did the last couple of weeks. Oh, but can we make a change in this language? Sure. And they'd find out sooner rather than later. Not building software at all. Trading desk. So I was working in an investment bank for a while, and they were executing these trades. So I don't fully understand how the business worked. I just remember that they would get an email, and by the end of the day, they needed to have executed that trade or people lost money. And people get very crabby when they would miss these emails. So we set up a process with them and a team where they could visualize these things coming through and watch it go through all the steps that it needed to go through in a 30-minute time frame to make sure that every single email they got was an executed trade. Nothing to do with software. And hardware development. One of our latest clients, they're building an electronic control unit for motorcycles, and they were using Scrum. But they were kind of a hybrid hardware Scrum or hybrid hardware software team, traditionally using waterfall, but they were also a very small group, so a lot of the team dynamic stuff they already had figured out. It was just finding a new way to work for them that was the challenge. Human resources, retail human resources. So onboarding policies. There was a group from, I can't name the clients here, but just trust me, very, 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 very big retailer. You might have heard of them. They had some other people come in that basically what they did is this. They had new employees come in, and they needed to get them up to proficiency as soon as possible. So they had to design systems to train people so that those people, when they came on, were proficient as soon as they could be proficient and adding value to the stores. So they were designing HR policies using an Agile approach. Nothing to do with software. So the best Agile waterfall marriages look something like this. Focus on deliverables in short time frames. Forget Scrum for a second. If you can do waterfall projects in 30 days or less, you're going to get a lot of benefits. Deliver the most valuable work first. Solve your customers' biggest challenges first. Shorten your projects up. Solve the most important things first. Can't say that enough times. And build the right thing at the right time. The trick to de-scoping a big project is not doing the work that's low value, because then you can just not do that work and you buy yourself some time. If you've already done all that work, you've already done the analysis and the requirements gathering and half of the coding work, but now when we're running late, we just say, oh, just test the critical stuff. It's very difficult for you to de-scope a project. So we build the right thing at the right time. We'll always have an opportunity to pull things out at the end because it's the lowest value stuff. I already covered that one. Oh, this is a good one. So if you're working with an outside party and you don't know if they do Scrum or not, you have no idea, you have no control at all you know is they're building some stuff for you, do not give them waterfall projects. They're going to fall on their face just like everyone else does. And they're not going to tell you about it. What they're going to do is they're going to say, oh, that was a requirement you didn't put in there, and that's a $30,000 change request. And you're like, no, it was in the requirements. Trust me, it's on page 1, document item number 3. Oh, yeah, well, there's some ambiguity there. And now at the end of the project, you're going to be going back and forth because there aren't things done, but somebody's still got to build them because you need them. If you were to shrink all your projects into 1-month projects and give only 1-month projects to your vendors and make them give you the results back every 30 days, you're going to eliminate a ton of risk, no matter how they work. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's the idea. Build cross-functional teams. So the idea here is that we eliminate dependencies when we don't have functional silos. Fewer dependencies, faster development. Even in waterfall projects, you can do the same thing. But in waterfall projects, if everyone is working in their own cubicle and they're separated by a building or by a floor or even a time zone, people tend to work in those silos and then just try to bring it all back together at the end. One of the reasons why healthcare.gov kind of came apart was because they were using waterfall development. Each different area was trying to integrate databases, and they weren't talking to each other. Surprisingly, they ended up fixing it with Scrum, but that's another story for another book. And reducing and removing dependencies. This is critical. Building cross-functional teams sometimes addresses that, but when you have dependencies on vendors or dependencies on other third parties, that's a risk thing, right? We've got to identify those things sooner. And if you do backlog refinement, that part in the product backlog of the Scrum Guide that talks about it, that work breakdown structure, it'll help you identify dependencies sooner, even using Scrum. But however you do it, you need to identify dependencies and try to remove them or resolve them as soon as you can, or projects go sideways. Yeah, and blockers. As project managers, are you typically the one responsible for removing blockers from a team's success? Raise your hand if you are the one that has to go deal with these things. Okay, so obviously we want to do that as quickly as we can. If you're using Scrum, it is also the job of the Scrum Master to do that, so maybe work together if you're on one of those hybridized teams. But by removing the things that are slowing your team down, they'll go faster. It's kind of like if you own a boat and you want it to go faster, just throw out all the bricks that are in the boat rather than add a new engine. That's more expensive. Remove the dead weight. Throw your friend off if they're not contributing. That's how we go faster. What's that?
Tried that once. We had to go back and get it.
Yeah, you have to go back and get them. It's frowned upon to throw your friend in a river when you're riding in a boat. I get it. Leverage bottom-up intelligence. So you've got a lot of smart people working with you, I hope. And if you don't, let's solve that problem first. But assuming you have a smart team of engineers and people working with you, leverage their intelligence. They know lots of things about what's really going on with the project. And if they're afraid to tell you, you're going to have a very, very distorted picture of what's going on. So these are some of the ideas on how you can marry a lot of the ideas of Agile and Waterfall into one little package and still be successful with it. Thank you. I'm available for questions if you have any.